Mark Lyman ran a hand through his hair as the comms panel on his workshop console beeped again. "No rest for the wicked," he muttered, flipping the channel open. His boss's voice, gruff and impatient, crackled through. "Lyman, we've got a hull breach on docking ring C. Get your ass over there." "On it," Mark replied, grabbing his tool belt. He tossed on a jacket that was more patches than fabric and headed out of his bay. The docking ring wasn't far, and as he approached, he saw Harlan, the station's chief engineer, already crouched near the damaged section. "Harlan," Mark greeted, nodding at the older man. Harlan looked up, his face set in a grim expression. "Got here just in time. We've got a minor breach, but if we don't patch it now, it'll spread." Mark dropped his bag. "Good thing I brought the whole kit. What do we know about how it happened?" "Some idiot pilot coming in hot," Harlan replied, passing Mark a small plasma cutter. "They clipped the outer ring, didn't even bother reporting it. I swear, these haulers treat this place like their personal scrapyard." Mark chuckled. "Wouldn't be the first time. All right, let's see what we're dealing with." The breach wasn't as bad as it could have been, but it was still wide enough to give Mark pause. The station's pressure shields were holding for now, but one wrong move could send a sharp fragment flying. As Mark started cutting away the warped plating, Harlan prepped a temporary patch. "You know," Harlan said as he worked, "when I first got this job, they told me it was just routine maintenance. Fix a few broken pipes, replace some filters. No one mentioned constant emergency repairs." "Would you have signed up if they did?" Mark asked, sparks flying from his cutter. "Hell no," Harlan laughed. "I'd have taken that cushy repair job on Europa Station." Mark shook his head, focused on his work. Harlan was the station's resident cynic, but his experience was invaluable. The two of them worked in a rhythm, cutting and welding without needing to exchange many words. After about 20 minutes, Harlan stood and inspected the patch. "Not bad. Should hold until we can replace the whole panel." Mark leaned back, wiping his forehead. Another day, another crisis averted. They cleaned up the site, double-checked the seals, and then made their way back toward the workshop. Along the way, they ran into Rhea, the station's logistics officer. She was short, with a mop of dark curls that seemed to defy gravity. "Mark, Harlan," she called, walking briskly toward them. "What's the status on Ring C?" "Patched for now," Mark said. "But we'll need a new panel before next week's shipments." Rhea sighed. "Of course we will. And let me guess, the pilot responsible is long gone." "Like clockwork," Harlan said. "They hit and run, we clean up the mess." Rhea rubbed her temples. "I'll add it to the report. You two are lifesavers, you know that?" Mark shrugged. "Just doing our job." "Well, keep it up. Without you guys, this station would fall apart." Rhea's comm pinged and she excused herself, leaving Mark and Harlan to continue back to the workshop. When they arrived, Harlan leaned against a workbench, stretching his back. "You know, kid, you're not half bad at this." "Coming from you, that's high praise," Mark joked, pulling off his gloves. "You sticking around tonight?" "Not tonight," Harlan said, shaking his head. "My wife's birthday. I promised her a real dinner, none of that rehydrated protein sludge." Mark smirked. "Good luck with that. I'll hold down the fort." Harlan gathered his things, leaving Mark alone in the workshop. He sank into a chair, finally catching his breath. The station hummed softly around him, the background noise of life in orbit. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work and Mark had grown to appreciate it. He glanced at the half-disassembled pulse regulator on his workbench. Another long night, he thought. Grabbing his tools, he dove back in, the quiet hum of the workshop his only company. Mark had just settled into his bunk when the station's emergency klaxon wailed through the corridors. He groaned, tossing his blanket aside and grabbing his boots. His comm crackled before he could even reach the door. "Lyman, you up?" Harlan's voice barked in his ear. "Wasn't planning on it," Mark replied, pulling his boots on. "What's going on?" "Another ship out of Dock 3. Power's fluctuating in their main drive system and they're refusing to leave until someone checks it out." Mark sighed. "Why do I get the feeling this is going to take all night?" "Because it probably will," Harlan said. "I'll meet you in the docking bay." Mark jogged through the narrow corridors, passing crew members who were just as disgruntled as he was. The station wasn't supposed to be running cargo at this hour, but rush jobs weren't exactly rare. When he reached the docking bay, Harlan was already there, scanning a datapad. "This one's a real piece of work," Harlan said, nodding toward the freighter. It was a bulky, older model that looked like it hadn't seen a proper maintenance cycle in years. The pilot claims he just got it serviced, but half the power readings are off the charts. "Serviced by who?" "A blind chimp," Mark asked, grabbing his tools. "Probably," Harlan grunted. "Let's get in there before he blows something important." The two boarded the freighter, their boots echoing on the metal floor. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burnt wiring. Mark wrinkled his nose. "Always a good sign." Harlan pointed to the main control console. "Start there. I'll check the power couplings in the engine room." Mark knelt by the console, opening a panel to reveal a tangle of mismatched wires. He let out a low whistle. "I don't even know where to start. Who wires a main console with two different gauge cables?" "Someone who doesn't know what they're doing," Harlan called back from the engine room. "You got this, or you need me to hold your hand?" Mark rolled his eyes. "I'll manage. Just keep me posted." He began sorting through the mess, isolating circuits and running diagnostics on the main drive system. The freighter's pilot, a grizzled man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, hovered nearby. "How long is this going to take?" the pilot asked, his tone sharp. "As long as it takes to keep you from drifting into a star," Mark shot back. "If you're in such a hurry, you should have had this done before showing up here." The pilot muttered something under his breath but backed off. Mark refocused on the wires, splicing in new connectors and swapping out fried components. The minutes stretched into hours as he worked through the mess. Occasionally, Harlan's voice came through the comm, updating him on the status of the power couplings. "Looks like a short in the main relay," Harlan reported at one point. "I'm bypassing it now, but you'll need to test the system before we sign off on this." "Yeah, I'm just about ready," Mark replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Give me a minute." Once the repairs were done, Mark fired up the diagnostics again. The console beeped, and for the first time all night, the readings looked stable. He radioed Harlan. "System stable. You good back there?" "Yeah, looks good from here," Harlan replied. "Bring the pilot back in so he can test it out." Mark turned to the pilot, who had been pacing nearby. "All right, you're up. Try running your startup sequence." The pilot grumbled but complied, punching in commands on the console. The freighter's engines hummed to life, smooth and steady. No more flickering lights, no erratic power surges. Mark crossed his arms, watching as the pilot checked the controls. "Looks like it's holding," the pilot admitted begrudgingly. "Guess you know your stuff." Mark exchanged a look with Harlan as he entered the room. "We do this for a living," Harlan said. "You're good to go. But next time, get a proper service before you show up here." The pilot grunted something that might have been a thanks before retreating to the cockpit. Mark and Harlan packed up their gear and made their way back to the station's main hub. As they walked, Harlan glanced at Mark. "Not bad. You're getting faster at this." "Maybe I'm just tired of spending all night in broken-down ships," Mark replied. Harlan chuckled. "Welcome to the life, kid." Back at the workshop, they debriefed with Rhea, who had been monitoring the situation from the control room. She raised an eyebrow at them as they entered. "That took a while. What was the issue?" "Shoddy wiring and a shorted relay," Mark said. "It's fixed now. Pilot's not happy, but he'll live." "Good work," Rhea said, making a note on her pad. "Hopefully that's the last one for tonight." Mark let out a weary laugh. "Don't jinx it." Rhea smirked. "I'll try not to. Get some rest if you can. You both look like you could use it." Mark and Harlan exchanged a look. "If only it were that easy," Harlan said. Mark nodded. "Yeah. Something tells me we'll be back at it before we know it." With that, they headed to their quarters, hoping for a few hours of peace before the next crisis came knocking. Mark tapped at the diagnostic screen, his brow furrowed. The readings on the alien drive core didn't make sense. Its energy patterns fluctuated like nothing he'd ever seen. "This thing shouldn't even be running," he muttered under his breath. Across the room, Harlan leaned against a support beam, arms crossed. "I told you it's a nightmare. I've never seen tech like this. It's as if whoever built it just said, 'Screw all logic. Let's see what happens.'" Mark smirked. "Sounds like how you handle half the repairs around here." "Watch it, kid," Harlan shot back. "You still have to fix this thing." Alana, the Asarlian pilot, entered the workshop, her posture tense. "What's taking so long?" she asked, her voice cool. Mark didn't look up. "Well, for starters, your ship's power core defies every engineering principle I know. So, Either you tell me exactly how this thing's supposed to work, or you let me keep guessing and hope I don't blow us all up. Alana folded her arms, her eyes narrowing. I don't have time for this. The longer I'm stuck here, the more danger I'm in. Yeah, you mentioned that, Mark replied, finally meeting her gaze. But without more information, I'm flying blind. You want this fixed, I need details. Anything you know about who built it, any schematics you have, anything at all. She hesitated, glancing at Harlan. The older mechanic simply raised an eyebrow, waiting. After a long pause, Alana sighed. Fine. The ship was modified by a rogue faction. They were trying to create a stealth drive that couldn't be detected by standard sensors. They failed. Miserably. Mark rubbed his temples. A stealth drive, of course. And now I'm supposed to reverse engineer their mess. Harlan stepped closer, nodding toward the screen. You might not need to reverse engineer it completely. If we can isolate the primary circuit paths, we can at least stabilize the power flow. Give her enough juice to get out of here. And how exactly do we isolate circuit paths when half of them don't exist in our system catalog? Mark asked, his tone sharp. This isn't like swapping out a fuel pump on a cargo hauler. Alana glanced between them. Can you do it or not? Mark exhaled, shaking his head. We'll try. Harlan handed him a thermal scanner, and the two men began the painstaking process of tracing the ship's internal circuitry. Alana hovered nearby, watching silently. The room grew quiet except for the hum of equipment and the occasional muttered curse from Mark or Harlan. After an hour, Harlan broke the silence. Looks like we've got 3 main conduits feeding into a central regulator. If we can reroute power through these secondary lines, we might stabilize the core. What do you think? Mark nodded slowly. It's a start. We'll need to reprogram the control unit to handle the redirected flow. Alana, do you have access codes for the ship's main computer? She hesitated again. I do, but I don't know if they'll work. The rogue faction changed a lot of the original protocols. Give me what you've got, Mark said. I'll take it from there. She handed him a small data chip and Mark plugged it into the terminal. Lines of alien code scrolled across the screen and he squinted at the unfamiliar symbols. Harlan, you ever seen anything like this? Nope, Harlan replied. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. Just means it's going to be a pain in the ass. Mark began typing commands, using what little knowledge he had of alien systems. It was slow going, but after several tries, he managed to gain limited access to the ship's core functions. He set to work rerouting the power flow as Harlan inspected the physical connections. Looks like the lines will hold, Harlan said. At least for now. Once we get the power stabilized, she should be able to take off. Mark turned to Alana. If this works, you'll have to take it easy until you're well out of range. No sudden jumps, no pushing the engines. Understood. She nodded, her expression softening just slightly. Understood. Harlan smirked. You hear that, kid? She's actually listening to you. Don't get used to it, Mark said, but he smiled as he turned back to his work. They spent the next several hours fine-tuning the systems. The tension in the room eased somewhat as they made progress. Mark and Harlan fell into their usual banter, with Alana occasionally chiming in. It was a strange camaraderie, but it worked. Finally, Mark stepped back from the console, wiping his hands on his jacket. That should do it. Run a test sequence. Harlan nodded and tapped a control panel. The ship's core thrummed to life, its energy readings stable for the first time since they'd started. Mark let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Looks good. Alana approached the console, her expression unreadable. You're sure it'll hold? As sure as I can be, Mark said. But like I said, keep it steady. No sudden moves. She studied him for a moment, then extended her hand. Thank you. Mark shook her hand, surprised by the gesture. Don't mention it. Just try not to break it again. Harlan chuckled. Kids got away with words. Alana allowed a faint smile before turning to inspect the console. I'll need to recalibrate some of the navigation settings, but I should be able to leave soon. Mark nodded. Good. The sooner you're out of here, the better. For everyone. Harlan clapped him on the back. Nice work, Lyman. You've got the makings of a decent engineer. Coming from you, that almost sounds like a compliment, Mark replied. Harlan grinned. Almost. As they began packing up their tools, Mark glanced at Alana. She was focused on her console, but something in her posture seemed more relaxed. He didn't know if she'd stick around or disappear the moment her ship was ready, but for now, they'd done their job, and that was enough. As Mark tightened the last bolt on the stabilizer assembly, Harlan leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed. You know, if you spent half as much time sleeping as you do tinkering, you might actually be a functioning human. Yeah, but then I wouldn't get to listen to your cheerful commentary, Mark replied without looking up. Harlan smirked. You love it. Before Mark could fire back, the workshop door slid open and Alana stepped in. She held a datapad close to her chest, her usual sharp expression tempered by something that might have been gratitude, though it was hard to tell. How's the stabilizer coming? Mark dusted his hands off and stepped back. It's installed. Should be good to go. Should? She repeated, arching an eyebrow. Hey, this isn't a certified repair station, Harlan interjected, pushing off the wall. We're making it up as we go. If you want a guarantee, find a corporate yard. Alana's gaze flicked to Harlan, then back to Mark. And what's your opinion? Will it hold? Mark hesitated. It's stable, but I'd keep an eye on the readings. If it starts fluctuating, we'll need to recheck the feed lines. Fine, she said. I'll monitor it. Harlan raised an eyebrow at Mark as if to say, see? She trusts you more than she lets on. Mark ignored him and turned his attention back to the ship's main console. I still want to do a full diagnostic run before you take off. I thought you said it was stable, Alana pointed out. It is, Mark said. But I don't trust what I can't see. Let's run it one more time. I've got a few ideas for improving the energy output. Harlan clapped Mark on the shoulder. You're on your own for this one. I've got to check the coolant tanks in Sector 2. Don't blow anything up while I'm gone. Yeah, Mark muttered, already focused on the console. Once Harlan was gone, the workshop felt quieter. Alana stood nearby, watching as Mark tapped at the console. He finally glanced at her. You can sit, you know. Standing there glaring at me isn't going to make this go any faster. I'm not glaring, she said, sitting on a nearby crate. I'm observing. Well, observe this. Mark turned the console screen toward her. See this readout? The power output's better than it was yesterday. I rerouted the secondary coupling to balance the load. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she studied the screen. I didn't think a human station would have the parts for that. We didn't, he said, smirking. I had to get creative. Let's just say the station's hydroponics bay is down one CO2 scrubber. She frowned. You cannibalized a life support system? Relax, he said quickly. We've got backups, and it was only a small component. It was either that or leave your drive core fluctuating like a busted power coil. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Thank you. He blinked. For the scrubber? For this. She gestured vaguely at the ship. For not giving up on it. Or me. He shrugged, suddenly feeling self-conscious. I'm just doing my job. It's more than that, she said, her tone softening. You didn't have to take this on. Most humans wouldn't. Mark leaned on the console, crossing his arms. You really think we're that bad? Not all of you, she admitted. But where I'm from, humanity has a reputation. It's not easy to change those perceptions. Well, maybe if more of your people actually worked with us instead of judging from a distance, things would be different, he said, his tone sharper than he intended. She held his gaze for a long moment, then looked away. Maybe. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I'm not saying humanity's perfect. Far from it. But we're not all as bad as you think. We're just figuring things out as we go. I can see that, she said quietly. They lapsed into silence, the hum of the ship's systems filling the room. After a few minutes, Mark straightened. All right, diagnostics are clear. Let's test the engines. Alana stood and joined him at the console. What do I need to do? Just start the ignition sequence. I'll monitor from here. She nodded and tapped a series of commands into the ship's control panel. The engines rumbled to life, steady and even. Mark watched the readouts closely, then gave her a thumbs up. Looks good. Alana exhaled as if she'd been holding her breath. That's a relief. You've got a working ship again, Mark said. Just don't go crashing it into anything else. She smiled faintly. I'll do my best. Mark shut down the console and stretched. All right, W. As she turned to leave, Mark called out, Alana. She stopped and looked back. Yes. For what it's worth, he said, you're not as bad as some of the aliens I've dealt with. She gave him a small, almost reluctant smile. I'll take that as a compliment. When she was gone, Mark leaned back against the console, a thoughtful expression on his face. He didn't know why he cared so much about fixing her ship. Maybe it was the challenge. Or maybe it was something else, something about her that he couldn't quite put into words. But whatever it was, he wasn't done yet. There was still work to do. Mark wiped his hands on a greasy rag, glancing at the ship one last time. I think that's it. She's ready to fly. About time, Harlan said, leaning against a bulkhead. He reached for his water flask and took a swig. If I have to spend one more night wrestling with those auxiliary conduits, I'm transferring to a luxury liner. Mark chuckled. You'd miss me too much. Maybe, Harlan replied, smirking. Or maybe I'd finally get a full night's sleep. Alana walked in, her boots echoing on the metal floor. She was dressed for travel, her posture straighter than before. There was a newfound confidence in her step that hadn't been there when she first arrived. So it's done. It's done, Mark said, tossing the rag aside. The stabilizer is holding steady, the core's running smoothly, and we've fine-tuned your thrust alignment. She's good to go. Alana hesitated for a moment as if searching for the right words. Thank you. Both of you. I couldn't have done this alone. You didn't make it easy, Harlan said with a laugh. But I'll give you credit, you stuck around, asked questions, even pitched in a bit when we needed an extra hand. I appreciate your patience, Alana said, her voice softening. And I'll make sure the ship doesn't fall apart again. At least not anytime soon. Mark stepped forward, holding a datapad. Here's everything you need. Diagnostic logs, repair notes, the whole shebang. If anything goes wrong out there, you'll know what to look for. She took the pad, their fingers brushing for a brief moment. I'll keep it safe. Harlan clapped his hands together. Well, if we're all set here, I've got a hot meal waiting for me. Lyman, you can handle the farewell tour, right? Mark glanced at Harlan, who winked and sauntered off toward the workshop's exit. Once he was gone, Mark turned back to Alana. He's a character. That's one way to describe him, she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. They stood there in a comfortable silence, the hum of the ship's systems filling the room. Finally, Mark cleared his throat. So, what's next for you? Alana looked thoughtful. I have to finish what I started. My mission hasn't changed, but I'll be going about it differently. With what I've learned here, I think I can make a better case to my people. And what happens if they don't listen? She met his gaze. Then I'll find another way. I can't let this failure define me. Mark nodded. Sounds like you've got it figured out. Not entirely, she admitted. But I'll get there. They moved toward the ship's boarding ramp. Alana turned back to face him. You know, you're not what I expected. Good or bad? Mark asked, grinning. Good, she said without hesitation. You're good at what you do. And you care more than most people I've met. Well, don't tell anyone, he joked. I've got a reputation to maintain. Her laugh was light, genuine. It made the room feel a little brighter. I won't ruin your secret. As they reached the ramp, she paused again. You didn't just fix my ship. You reminded me that trust isn't always a weakness. Glad I could help, Mark said. Just remember that when you're out there, not everyone's out to get you. I'll keep that in mind, she said. She took a step up the ramp, then turned back once more. If I'm ever in the area again, maybe I'll stop by. Mark crossed his arms, a faint smirk on his face. I'll keep a wrench ready. Alana smiled, then boarded the ship. Moments later, the engines rumbled to life. The vessel rose steadily, its newly repaired systems humming in harmony. Mark watched as it disappeared into the stars, his thoughts lingering on the strange, unexpected partnership they'd formed. Harlan's voice crackled over the comm, interrupting his thoughts. So, she's gone. Yeah, Mark replied, still staring at the empty docking bay. Don't look so gloomy, Harlan said. You'll have another project soon enough. Probably something even worse. Mark laughed softly. Can't wait. He made his way back to the workshop, the echoes of Alana's departure still fresh in his mind. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he felt ready. Not because the work would be easier, but because it had become more than just a job.